Hi, and welcome to All About Bugs, where I take you into our food forest and show you some of the bugs that live there and what they do in our food forest. So to start, I'm going to give you an overview. So we're going to go over bugs and why they're so important to the ecosystem. We're going to go over specifically the ladybug and the ladybug life cycle. We're going to go over some of the other bugs found in the food forest and the important roles they play. We're going to go over bug biodiversity and why biodiversity in the bug world is so important. And then I'm going to give you an at-home activity and some resources that you can do on your own at home. So let's talk about why bugs are so important. I mean, some people find them cool, some people find them gross. I find them very cool. But why are they so important? Why can't we just exterminate all of them? Well, bugs have different roles in the ecosystem, and without them, the ecosystem couldn't function. So some are decomposers, and they break down dead organic matter like dead leaves, dead trees, even dead insects and dead animals. They break it down into nutrient-rich soil, and soil is really important for plants to grow. And some of them are herbivores, so they eat plants. Some of them are carnivores. Some of them eat other insects, or even sometimes animals. There's some giant spiders out there that have eaten birds. So some are carnivores. Some are also parasites, which aren't so good. Parasites feed on other animals and usually kill the animal. But some have a symbiotic relationship, like the bee and the flower. The flower gives the bee nectar and pollen to survive, and the bee pollinates the flower so the flower can reproduce. So that's a symbiotic relationship. Both people, or plant and bee, benefit from each other, and so much more. So they play so many different roles in the ecosystem. They help keep the ecosystem in balance. Without certain insects, other insects would take over and destroy a forest. And they're the almost invisible workers in any ecosystem, whether we're talking about a forest or a field, or in our case, a food forest. And unfortunately, they're declining at an alarming rate due to three things: climate change, they're having a hard time adapting to the changes in climate; chemical use, so pesticides and herbicides and other chemicals that humans use; and also loss of habitat. We're cutting down forests and clearing fields at rates at which these insects can't find a place to live. They're losing their homes. So let's start with the ladybug. So the ladybug is pretty important and one of most people's favorite insects. So ladybugs are carnivores. They eat other bugs. So they don't eat plants, they eat bugs. And they help keep the food forest destroying pests. So the pests that might eat all of the food crops, like broccoli and tomatoes and peppers, they eat those bugs. And that's why we love them. We want them all over the place because they eat these pests that eat our food crops. So I'm going to just show you the ladybug life cycle real quick because I was able to this week get all of these pictures because guess what? It's springtime and all of the ladybugs are hatching and laying eggs. So let's start with the first step, which is kind of a blurry picture, I apologize. But we have eggs. They're really tiny, and they're usually found on the underside of leaves. These are ladybug eggs, and they hatch into larva, or the nymph stage, which looks like that, and I actually have a better picture. So after they hatch, they then turn like this blackish color. So right here is a nymph, or the larva stage. This is an adult in the same picture. But this is what they look like before they turn into that red ladybug with spots all over it that we're used to seeing. Here, they form kind of like, I don't know, a chrysalis. It's like a chrysalis. It's called a pupa. It has this skin over it, and they attach themselves to leaves, and they transform themselves. So this is a later stage. This is one that's about to shed its skin. The skin is about to come off, and it will be transformed into an adult. And this is what they look like when they first come out. They're like yellow, and then they start to turn a light orange, and it's not till much later that they actually turn red and get spots. So this is a newly hatched one, And this is what they end up looking like as adults. Red or dark orange with spots. All right. Also, because it's ladybug season, I've also been privy to ladybugs mating. I had actually never seen it before. So I caught on video ladybugs mating, and you can see in the video here that they're mating, and the female, which you can't really tell, is actually much larger than the male. That's one way you can tell the difference between a female ladybug and a male ladybug, is the female is actually much larger than the male. So that's ladybugs mating. And then let's meet some of the other bugs in our food forests and see what they do in the food forest. So we're going to go over different pollinators. We're going to go over millipedes, spiders, spittlebugs, pests, and aquatic bugs. So starting with pollinators. So pollinators, there's so many, more than I could ever take pictures of. But they include things like bumblebees. This is a painted lady butterfly. This is a honeybee pooping. And this is what's called a morning cloak butterfly. And these are the very first butterflies of spring. These are the ones you'll see very early on in spring. That's when you know spring is coming, because the morning cloak butterflies are out. And they're pretty large butterflies. But pollinators are important because they drink the nectar of the flowers, and some of them collect pollen, and that's their food source. But as a result of doing that, the pollen gets stuck to their body, and as they go from flower to flower, they spread the pollen out, and that helps the flowers to reproduce. So without them, we wouldn't have flowers. Flowers couldn't reproduce. They also pollinate food crops. So the importance of this is when pollination occurs, that's when the fruit forms, because that's when the seed is made. So without them, we wouldn't have things like blueberries, zucchinis, oranges, pretty much any of the fruit you see. Cherries, plums, peaches, all of those things have to be pollinated by pollinators in order to actually form fruit that we eat. So they're pretty important to keep in our ecosystem. So when you see them, don't squash them. They're good for the ecosystem. We want to keep them around. And I'll give you guys some ideas on how to actually attract them to your yard. All right, next we have millipedes, also an amazing insect, really important for the ecosystem. They're decomposers. And without them, we wouldn't have healthy soil. They break down all this organic matter and break it down into nutrients that then the plants can take up and use to grow, and then that makes it a healthy plant that then we can eat or other animals can eat, which makes them healthy and us healthy. So this is a millipede kind of just sticking its head out of a hole in the dirt. And this is a cool millipede because this is a bioluminescent millipede. So basically glows in the dark. It's really cool, and they're only found in certain parts of the United States, and Northern California is one of the only places you can find them. So it's pretty cool. It's hard to see in this picture, but he's got, like, he or she has green glowing legs, and they don't really know much about these guys. They don't know why they glow. There's two theories. One is to attract a mate, because when you're underground, it's pretty dark. It's hard to find a mate. And another reason might be to protect them from predators, because the bioluminescent chemical that they release in their bodies makes them poisonous to some animals. So it might also serve as a protection against things that might eat them. But that's millipedes. All right, now spiders. You either love them or you hate them. Most people are scared of them. Well, not most people. Some people are scared of them. But they're really, really super important. Just like the ladybug, they're carnivores. They eat other insects, and they're super important in controlling insect populations, especially things that we don't like mosquitoes. So they eat those guys. They keep the pesky bug population low so that they don't just take over. So they're also food sources for other animals such as birds and lizards. So they're all part of the food chain in the ecosystem, and so they're really important. Just like most insects are a food source for things like birds and lizards and snakes and frogs, spiders are as well. So they're really important in controlling those pesky insects. Every time I see a spider, I leave it alone because it plays its role in the ecosystem, and it's going to eat some of those bad bugs that I don't want eating my tomatoes. So here's two examples. These are two spiders of the same species. This is a jumping spider that caught a bad bug called an earwig or a pincher bug, because it looks like it has these pinchers on the base of its tail-like appendage. And the earwigs eat a lot of different types of crops, so they're not good to have all over it. And so this jumping spider, one of the largest species of jumping spider, caught this earwig and is eating it. And this is on our artichoke plant, so we don't want those earwigs eating all of the artichokes. So it's good that this jumping spider's around. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a picture, but yesterday, this same jumping spider on the same artichoke plant got a honeybee with its legs full of pollen, and it ate the honeybee, which I didn't really want to happen, but hey, the jumping spider has to eat too. So next we're going to talk about pests, and I put this in quotes because although we don't like them, they are actually super important for the ecosystem because they are a food source for a lot of other animals. So examples of pests that we think are pests are mosquitoes, earwigs, which I just showed you right here, aphids, these are aphids, I think this is a Brussels sprout leaf, spittle bugs, which also eat plants, and pine beetles, which can destroy a pine forest in less than a year, and so much more. So there's lots and lots of pests out there that we don't like. But although they're destructive and annoying, they are an important food source for other insects and animals, such as birds, and like I said, these are aphids, and aphids, ladybugs almost feed exclusively on aphids. They search out the aphids and they just eat them. So they are important even though they are pests for us. So I'm going to go into a little more detail about a specific pest called the spittlebug, also known as frog hoppers, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But this is a spittlebug nest. It basically looks like spit on the base, usually the base or stem of a plant. And the nymphs, so after they hatch out of their egg, they become a nymph. They create the spit in their bodies and secrete it through their anus or their butt. And the spit protects them from predators and keeps them warm while they develop into adults. The adults and the nymphs are considered pests because they suck the fluids from the stalks of the plants. So that's not good. They can sometimes take so much out of the plant that the plant dies. And the adults are called frog hoppers because they hop from plant to plant. So if we take a closer look here, we can see a couple of really cool things. So these guys are actually adults. These are the frog hoppers. Okay? They're actually emerging. They just transformed and are emerging from the spit. So these are the adult frog hoppers. Inside, oh, here's a spider you can see. It got stuck in the spit. So this spider probably was trying to eat the nymphs, but the spit caught it. It's too sticky. This spider's either going to die because it's stuck, or it's going to get the heck out of there so it doesn't die. And then I believe, though I'm not entirely sure, the nymphs are green. So they're hard to see on the stalk of a plant, but I believe if you look in here, you can see some of the nymphs. They're these like caterpillar-like green little bugs. So that's what's in a spittlebug nest. All right, and then there's aquatic bugs. We have a lot in our pond here. The most common one, which I don't have a picture of, or the two most common, is called a water boatman and the mayfly larva. So a lot of bugs have their larva stage before they turn into adults. It's in the water. So, and they only come out when they transform into adults. And examples of that are dragonfly. Dragonflies actually have their larva in the water. They only crawl out to transform into dragonflies. Mayflies, and also a caddisfly, which my sister found this picture. This is not in our pond, but it could be because it is a type of insect that lives in water. but it's called a caddisfly, and it's very similar to a mayfly if you've ever seen a mayfly. But I'll show you this. It's this creepy looking, but also cool looking larva, and it has a long sticky body, and it literally sticks rocks and sticks to it. And all this plant matter, anything can stick to it. But the reason it does that is it's camouflage, so that no predators can eat it. It's basically carrying around its home. It makes a home on top of its body, and it sticks to its body, and it carries its home around until it's ready to transform into an adult. But I thought that was cool. So, there you have that. Alright, so now, those are just a few. There's hundreds of thousands of species of bugs in California, if not more. We're learning new species every single day. But those are just a few that live in the food forest that I've witnessed and I've seen. But there's tons more. So let's talk about what bug biodiversity is and why it's important. So bugs are actually decreasing at an alarming rate, like I said earlier, due to climate change, habitat loss, and chemical use. And that's not good, because bugs are essential for a lot of processes. Like I said, they pollinate flowers, they pollinate food crops, so things like strawberries and blueberries and all of the yummy stuff you love to eat. And they're also a food source for other animals like birds and amphibians, so lizards and frogs and snakes. And without them, those animals can't survive. And without the pollinators, we can't eat. So that's why they're important. But biodiversity just means living diversity. So it's just the number of different species. So say we only had mosquitoes. That wouldn't be high diversity. That's only one type of insect. There's no diversity there at all. We just have a world overrun by mosquitoes, and pretty sure that nothing could survive that. But the more species you have, the healthier the ecosystem. So you want to see pollinators, but you want to see all the different kinds of pollinators. The more pollinators, the better. So the bumblebees and the native bees and the carpenter bees and the honeybees and the swallowtails and the monarchs and the painted lady butterflies. You want a lot of different types. That's biodiversity. The more different types you have, the higher the biodiversity. So you want to look for biodiversity in your area. You want to see a lot of different types of bugs. Because if you only see aphids and there's no ladybugs to eat them, well, then you're going to have a hard time growing all your food. So we want a high biodiversity. Biodiversity keeps everything in balance so that we don't have problems like losing entire pine forests from the pine beetle. So how can you help with biodiversity? There's lots of things you can do at home that can help. So one is plant native plants and flowers. If you're planting those, you're going to get lots of those native bugs to come to your yard or your balcony or your window box. So planting native plants and flowers is really going to attract and keep alive the bugs that we want. Don't use any herbicides or pesticides in your yard. I know dandelions in the lawn is kind of annoying to a lot of people, but it's super important for honeybees. Honeybees love dandelions, and if you spray them with herbicides, then the honeybees end up dying. So it's important not to use any chemicals in your yard, because that's what's making all of these insects disappear. You want to plant an assortment of flowers, so a diversity of flowers and plants. So not just one type. Don't just plant a field of dandelions. You want to plant all sorts of different types so you can attract all sorts of different types of bugs. You want to also make sure there's a water source nearby. Honeybees especially, and butterflies, they all need a water source. A really easy way to do that is a bird bath, a little bird bath with some rocks in it so they can land on the rocks and drink from the water. They love it. Build a bug habitat. So there's all of these cool things. You can find all these designs online for ladybug towers, a bee house, a native bee house, or a butterfly habitat. That way you can actually raise them yourselves and watch them, and it also provides a safe habitat for them. So make sure all lights, especially outside lights, are turned off at night, because a lot of our night species that we never see are going extinct because they're attracted to light, like the light of the moon. and they get stuck or trapped in lights. So actually lots of species of moths are endangered and going extinct because of lights and light pollution. So that's something that you guys can do as well. All right. So what I'd like you to do, if you would like to do it, is a little at-home activity, which is go on a bug hunt. And I want you to take pictures, draw, or even just write down and describe the bugs you observe and put that in your nature journal or the handout on my website. Identify the bugs. You can use a reference book or simply try to find it online. It's okay if you can't find the name of the species. You can just put a question mark next to it in your nature journal. But once identified, I want you to research and write down, or you can draw a picture to describe it, the role that bugs play in the ecosystem. So what does that bug do? Does it pollinate things? Is it a carnivore? Does it eat pests? What does it do? What does it eat? What eats it? What's its role? Then record the number of different types of bugs you observe. That's biodiversity. And record the number in your nature journal. So say you saw a ladybug, a bumblebee, a honeybee, and a painted lady butterfly. That would be 4 different types of bugs. So your biodiversity number would be 4. And you want to record that in your nature journal. So the more diversity you see, the healthier the ecosystem. It's actually a pretty simple test to see how healthy it is around your house. So did you see a lot of kinds? What bugs did you observe the most? Sometimes there are certain bugs that kind of take over. And did you notice that any bugs took over the area? If so, you might need to look for something that might control that population. So maybe you don't have enough spiders. Maybe you don't have enough ladybugs. So that's something to keep an eye on. And then don't forget to record the date, time of day, location, and weather, as those all may affect what types of bugs you observe. So it depends on what time of year it is. It depends on the time of day. Bugs come out at different times. Some are nocturnal. Some only come out in the morning and the evening. Some are out all afternoon but aren't out in the morning and the evening. So it's important to record when you're going out to do this because you might see different bugs at different times. All right. And if you would like to learn more about bugs, there's a bunch of citizen science projects you can do at home by simply observing bugs and taking down some data on the bugs, like how many you see, where you saw it, time of day, etc., etc. This link, 6 citizen science projects. There's only 4 you can do in this area. 2 of them are out of the country, but there's 4 citizen science projects you can participate in. The one I like the most is the dragonfly one, so especially if you live kind of near a stream or some water source, it's fun to observe the dragonflies and what they're doing, and you can upload all of that information onto the Citizen Science website. And then great kids website all about bugs, which includes information, activities, and crafts, is pestworldforkids.org. And then you can visit my website, regenlives.com, for the handout that goes with this lesson. I also have some resources from my last class on Introduction to Beehive that also has more citizen science projects for honeybees and other insects and bumblebees on that handout. So if you check out the Introduction to Beehive handout, you'll get the even more resources, but those are more geared towards pollinators. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this and hope to see you next week. Thanks.